Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT06, and BT06 offers us lots of good cards to be using on a budget, and today is going to be a budget blue deck, and I guess this is for all intents and purposes a demake of the hexablaumon deck, and just filling out some of those cards that we should be using with just some really good cheap budget replacements. So we're still going to be using basically the same type of core or engine that hexablaumon is going to be working with. So we're trying to attack the opponent's inheritable sources and leave their opponent with a Digimon without any inheritable sources, so our Digimon can gain some sort of benefit, and there's no better card to use on a budget than Vikemon, which also will allow us to just try to punch the opponent's security as hard as we possibly can, so that way we could try to close out the game as quickly as we possibly can. And we do have lots of new cards that, well, I guess we're supposed to support the hexablaumon deck, but now they're supporting Vikemon instead just because they're still decent cards to be working with. So without further ado, onto the deck profile. I'm going to be running one copy of Bukamon. So Bukamon is just the 5th Digitama of the deck. It could really be anything you feel like you want it to be, but I really do like what Bukamon is doing for the deck because he is one of the primary ways we're going to be attacking the opponent's inheritable sources to leave their Digimon without any inheritable sources for our own cards to benefit from. So what this card is doing is he has the inheritable ability of, when attacking, not limited to once per turn, you get to trash the bottom Digivolution source off the bottom of one of the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon, so that way we have an easy way to try to pick off their abilities. But the main Digitama of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Kyaromon. So Kyaromon is going to be the main source of draw for the deck just because it has this nice inheritable ability where during your turn, once per turn, when one of your opponent's Digivolution sources is trashed, then we get to draw 1 card. So every time we're going to be trashing the opponent's inheritable sources, we get to draw a card as part of the benefit. That we don't even need to attack or do anything to trigger this ability, just making it a very easy and good way to just try to pick off the opponent's inheritable sources and gain a benefit for doing so. Next, on to the rookies, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Elecmon. So Elecmon is a pretty solid Digimon to be using just because he is a very efficient Digimon to be using. He has a low play cost, he has a low evo cost, and he has some decent DP, just making him an overall solid card to use still. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Bulucomon. So Bulucomon is another card that allows us to gain a benefit for removing the opponent's inheritable sources. So what this card is doing is basically the exact same as what Kyaromon is doing, except we're going to be gaining a memory instead of drawing a card. So he has the nice inheritable ability where during your turn, once per turn, when you trash a Digivolution source off of one of your opponent's Digimon, then we get to gain 1 memory. So between the two, if we have them in the same stack and we start removing the opponent's inheritable sources, then we get to draw a card and gain a memory, and that's just really good because that's just allowing us to not only extend and enhance some of our plays, but find and dig for more cards that we want to try to find. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gorillamon. So Gorillamon is a brand new card to come out of BT06, and I think Gorillamon complements this deck really nicely because he has this nice inheritable ability where during your turn, while the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then this Digimon gains plus 2000 DP. So Blue has always had an issue with trying to DP boost their Digimon, so Gorillamon is just one of the stronger ways that we have to try to DP boost our Digimon to ensure that our Digimon are going to be as strong as they possibly can when they're going to be swinging into the opponent's security. So this paired up with our Vikemon could make Vikemon up to 15k, and that's just really strong because he'll have security tech plus on top of anything else the stack is doing. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Gabumon. So this is the starter deck Gabumon, and this Gabumon is really good because he has this nice inheritable ability where during all turns, if you have 8 or more cards in your hand, then this Digimon gains plus 1000 DP. So it's just really being used as an alternate way to try to DP boost our Digimon for them to be as strong as they possibly can, and the fact that this persists through your turn and the opponent's turn makes this a really powerful buff to be working with, especially since we're in blue, and blue has lots of ways of drawing cards, making it so that having 8 cards in our hand isn't necessarily the hardest thing in the world to do. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gorillamon. So Gorillamon is a flex spot for the deck. This card could really be anything you feel like you want to be using, but I feel like Gorillamon is still just a really good card to be playing just because he's a tempo efficiency card, making it easy to digivolve into, and because it's easy to digivolve into him, we could get into our higher stages that much faster. On top of that, he also has 6,000 DP, which is just pretty high for a level 4 to be playing around with, making him a really good card to aggress with if we need to. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kyaromon. So Kyaromon is going to be the deck's dedicated blocker. This is a pretty good card just because it's acting very similar to Gorillamon, where we're using it for its tempo efficiency on top of the fact that it's a blocker. So this is just a very solid card to be using for that purpose alone. And because it's a more tempo efficient card, we're not necessarily afraid of digivolving on top of it just because it was so easy to digivolve into it if we need to just use it to try to get into our higher stages. But I do understand that it isn't as good as a blocker as some of the other cards that we could be using. So I'm also going to be running 2 copies of Grizzlymon to be more of the deck's main blocker, just because the 6,000 DP versus the 5,000 DP actually is starting to matter. So between the two, we just have a really solid blocker lineup that we're using for our level 4s to try to wall out and stave off some of the opponent's aggression. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Kyaromon. So Kyaromon is a pretty decent card just because he is a security Digimon, so when he's checked in the security, he'll play himself for free, and he has an on-play ability to complement the fact that he is a security Digimon of allowing us to draw 2 cards, so that way we could, well, try to find the cards that we're looking for. And then if we do just need to hard play him to try to draw 2, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world to do. So this is just a pretty good champion to be using overall. Next, on to the ultimates, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Kyaromon. So Kyaromon is one of the primary ways we're going to be removing the opponent's inheritable sources off of their Digimon. So he has this nice when digivolving ability where we get to trash the bottom Digivolution source off of all of the opponent's Digimon. So that's really good because it's targeting more than just one Digimon, it's targeting all of them. So if they do just have a wide board, then he could start picking apart all of their inheritables, which just allows us to easily turn our abilities online. And then on top of that, he also has a nice inheritable ability, which is the primary reason why we're playing the card, because he has this nice ability where during your turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then this Digimon gains security attack +1, allowing our Megas to punch even harder than they normally would be able to. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Mijiramon. So Mijiramon is just another very fantastic card for the deck to be using for very similar reasons to Kyaromon. So what this card is doing is he has a when digivolving ability that allows you to trash one Digivolution source from the top of one of your opponent's Digimon. So this could start picking apart at the opponent's high-level inheritable sources. So that could be really good at picking from the bottom and then picking from the top. And then on top of that, he also has a nice when attacking ability that he gives as an inheritable ability to complement our Megas trying to hit as hard as they possibly can, where when attacking once per turn, if your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then we get to unsuspend this Digimon. So this just allows our Mega level Digimon to multi-attack, and multi-attacking is just really good, allowing them to deal as much damage as they possibly can, especially paired up with Security Attack Plus. But speaking of our Megas, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Vikemon. So Vikemon is a pretty powerful Digimon to be using with all of these new tech and tools to support him, especially on a budget. So what this card is doing is he has this nice main ability where during your turn, while your opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, then this Digimon gains plus 1,000 DP and Security Attack +1. So this is really good because, well, we're trying to attack the opponent's inheritable sources, leaving their Digimon without it, so we could trigger various other abilities off. So we could make some really powerful stacks with Vikemon. So if we use Kyaromon, then he'll gain an extra Security Attack +1, so he could hit for 3 security, or if we used Mijiramon, then he could swing twice, so that way we could take advantage of the fact that he already has Security Attack Plus to hit for potentially 4 security. And then on top of that, we have Gizamon to help DP boost this card, so that way he could hit all the way up to 15k. So that's just really, really powerful, all on a budget, and I think he's a pretty decent card to be using as a result, just because we have all of these new tech and tools to support him. And then the last Digimon of the deck and the supporting Mega of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Slayerdramon. So I wasn't necessarily super high on Slayerdramon, and then I thought, oh, he just gives himself Security Attack +1 for the turn and is an unblockable Digimon, so that's just pretty decent because we still have all of the synergy with Majiramon and Crispaldramon to allow him to deal lots of damage relatively quickly, and we still have a whole bunch of DP boosts to shore up the fact that he has only 11,000 DP to make his swings as safe as we can possibly make them. So it's not like he's a bad card for the deck, and I do like the fact that we could use him just because that Security Attack +1 is all we're really trying to gain to make him hit as hard as we possibly can. And this card opens up the doors to having a whole bunch of other cards, so if you do want to include BT05 Omnimon, then this card complements that card really nicely by extending the buff over to him if you're going off of a budget. So I think even though Slayerdramon isn't necessarily the best supporting card, he's still just a solid supporting card to try to punch the opponent's security as hard as he possibly can, and the fact that he's unblockable just makes it really easy to aggress with the card. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Howling Memory Boost. So Howling Memory Boost is one of the primary ways we're going to be picking off the opponent's inheritable sources because, well, our Digimon really aren't doing a whole lot of that. So what this card is doing is it has the main ability where we get to trash 2 Digivolution sources from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon, and then one of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources can't attack or block until the end of the opponent's turn, and then we get to place it in the battle area to use for its delay ability to gain 2 memory at a later turn. So this is just really, really powerful just because, well, it's picking off the opponent's inheritable sources, and it's stun locking the opponent's Digimon, so that way they can't use it as long as it doesn't have inheritable sources. So this is just really powerful to act as not only a form of control, but to allow us to aggress even easier on our opponent, so that way we're not in constant fear of what the opponent's Digimon could be doing. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Hammerspark. I really wanted to run 4 copies, but I don't think the deck really needs 4 copies. The most powerful thing we're going to be doing with this card is gaining the 1 memory as its main ability to just allow us to Digivolve into Vikemon and not potentially pass the turn, so that way we could swing with Vikemon right away. And that's really the main reason why we're running this card, is just trying to make our plays as efficient as we possibly can, because gaining that 1 memory is just that good. And then on top of that, it also is acting as our primary defense in our security, where its security ability is allowing us to gain 2 memory to try to basically take away 2 memory from the opponent, so that way their turns are less efficient, or it could even forcibly end their turn depending on where their memory is at. Next, onto the Tamers, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Matt Ishida. So this should probably be Davis, just because Davis helps with the overall consistency of the deck, but Davis is a little bit more of an expensive card, and Matt Ishida is still a pretty decent card to be using as an alternative memory fixer, because we really care about the fact that he's just a memory fixer and nothing else, just because starting our turn always at least 3 memory is just that important, allowing us to make some of our plays as efficiently as we possibly can. And then he has the upside where during your turn, when you play a blue Digimon, you could suspend this Tamer to trash the bottom Digivolution source off of one of the opponent's Digimon. So if we do need to hard play some of our Digimon, which we can in the deck, then he also is going to be rewarding us by trying to pick off the opponent's inheritables, so it's another way of attacking the opponent's inheritables at the same time while running a memory fixing Tamer. But the main Tamer and main source removal of the deck is going to come from 3 copies of Sora and Joe. So Sora and Joe is just that good of a card to be using. So at the start of our turn, if the opponent has a Digimon with no Digivolution sources in it in play, we get to gain 2 memory. This ability does stack, so the more Sora and Joes we have, the more instances of this ability we have, and the more memory we could potentially gain, making this one of the best ways we could gain lots of memory in the deck, especially if we pair it up with our memory fixing Tamer, putting us to 3, then Sora and Joe can put us to 5, 7, or 9 relatively easily. And then this is going to be the main source of, well, source removal, just because it has the nice ability where during your turn, when you attack with one of your blue Digimon, you get to suspend this Tamer to trash up to 2 Digivolution sources from the bottom of one of the opponent's Digimon. So this is a very powerful and very easy way of picking off the opponent's inheritables to trigger some of our various abilities and make sure our Digimon are online as often as they possibly can be, making this just one of the best, if not the best Tamer we could be running for this style of deck. And then there's still just a whole bunch of flexibility that you have with the deck depending on what direction you want to take the deck in. I do think the natural progression of what this deck wants to be is going to be off of hexablaumon, just because hexablaumon is attacking the opponent's inheritables, stun locking their Digimon, giving himself jamming. He's just doing a lot that is all benefiting the deck, and there's no real downside to running hexablaumon. And then one of the better cards to run with hexablaumon is also going to be Azulongmon, just because Azulongmon is finally adding that extra level of aggression that hexablaumon was lacking, where he's attacking the opponent's inheritable sources and he's punching the opponent really hard because he'll gain security attack +1 for each Digimon the opponent has without a inheritable source in it in play. So between the two of them, that's just what the main mega lineup should be, just because it covers lots of different bases and allows you to aggress relatively easily. But you do have other ways that you could possibly play the deck, like using some various all forces, just because the all forces play nicely with Sora and Joe, and attacking the inheritable sources isn't a bad thing for either of them, just because the All-Force from BT02 could multi-attack for each of our Sora and Joes being suspended. Then we could pick apart their inheritables, and then we could use the fact that we're picking apart their inheritables to do various things to try to support our All-Forces. And then we also have the starter deck All-Force, just because it's a generically decent card that, again, we could use for that multi-attacking aspect, and he's actually adding a little bit of removal with being able to bounce one of the opponent's level 4 or lower Digimon. So we do have various ways that we could play the deck, and we also could think about using Vikemon, just because Vikemon is another really solid card. It's mainly there to support the All-Force side, but his inheritable ability is just generically decent, where when attacking, if you have 7 or less cards in your hand, then you get to draw 1 card. So we do have Majiramon to allow whatever mega we're using to multi-attack to get multiple draws off of this Vikemon. But we also should be considering to run Gorillamon, just because having multiple instances of gaining the 1 memory for trashing the opponent's inheritable sources is just that good. And we also have various different ways to attack the opponent's inheritable sources. One of the main ways is going to be off of Paledramon, just because we could line up a nice stack to just start using Paledramon to get some early game value in. And then we do have some other cards to benefit off of for attacking the opponent's inheritables. So Ikakumon just allows our Vikemon to basically be unblockable, which is really good. So that way we could ensure that we're dealing damage, similar to how we're going to be using Slayerdramon. And then, as I stated before, we do have Omnimons that we could be running in the deck. BT05 Omnimon is just one of the best Omnimons because of the Blitz ability and the ability to unsuspend himself, so that way we could Digivolve into him, swing right away, and break even more security or close out the game with him. And then he also has some built-in protection, just making it harder for the opponents to deal with him, so that way he's just a very sticky card on the field if we don't close out the game with him, and he just applies lots of consistent pressure. But we do also have X Antibody, and we also do have BT01 Omni to think about playing with still, just because they're really good level 7s. Then we do have some really good removal for the deck. So Absolute Blast is a really solid card just because it's acting as more source removal. So it's already trashing the opponent's inheritable sources, and then it also has the ability to return one of the opponent's Digimon with no inheritable sources to the bottom of the owner's deck. So that's just really good, just because it can bypass lots of protections, and it's putting it to the bottom, so that way the opponent isn't going to gain the benefit for any on-delete abilities, and they can't reuse it because it's not going back to their hand. Then we do have Rattlestar to act very similarly to Absolute Blast. It's just the condition to put the card to the bottom of the opponent's deck is a little bit differently, with them needing to have multiple Digimon on the field. Otherwise, it's just going to generically bounce a level 5, which isn't the worst thing in the world. So it's still just another really strong removal type option we could be using. And then we also do have Cocytus Breath as just a generic bounce, and we have a slightly weaker version of Cocytus Breath, with a V-Wing Blade as just another generic bounce spell. And then on top of that, we also could be thinking about running Blue Memory Boost for some more consistency, just because looking at the top 4 for any blue Digimon is just that good, with the delay ability of gaining 2 memory at a later turn. And then, as I stated before, the main memory fixing tamer should be Davis, just because Davis helps with the consistency, but Davis is a little bit more pricier than Matt, so Matt is just a better budget card to be using that still has synergy with the deck. But again, Davis is just one of the best, if not the best, memory fixing tamer we currently have for blue. And then if you want to run some source removal on our inheritable sources, we do have various different Digimon that we could be doing it with. So we have the Gabumon line from the first blue starter deck that all want to try to trash the opponent's inheritables, and then we even have the Gorillamon that could give Security Tech Plus, similar to how we're using Chris Paildramon, but I think Chris Paildramon is, well, just a better card. And then we also have Ikakumon to remove from the top as a level 4. We also have Piranhamon to remove from the top as a level 5, and then we also have more removal from the bottom in the form of Angemon and Magna Angemon. So both of them do the exact same thing on trying to remove from the bottom, and all of these source removal cards are just generically decent to be using, just because we do need to have the opponent to have Digimon without inheritable sources in it in play, in order for lots of our cards to gain their extra benefits and bonuses. But for the most part, this is just what the deck is trying to do. It's just trying to be a simplified version of what the Hexablaumon deck and Azulon deck is trying to be. So we still have lots of powerful cards that we could be using that we could then upgrade and transition the deck into various different directions. And I think that the deck on a budget is still relatively decent, even though it's not as strong as Hexablaumon or Azulon. It's not necessarily bad because we're just using a lot of very similar parts and pieces to do very powerful things with. Just because the support is finally there to, well, support this type of strategy, so I think it's a pretty fun and decent deck to be playing around with a whole bunch of different ways you could upgrade it depending on the direction you want to take. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.